I'm Łuksz Szczepankowski. I'm a senior quest designer, also at CD Projekt RED, and today we'd like to welcome you on our presentation about adaptations of RPG system to computer games.
Okay, so we'll start with a bit of history first. Beginnings of the computer RPG games go back, way back to the beginnings of RPG systems. In 1974, the first RPG game ever called Dungeons & Dragons, probably you know that name, was first released. And 1 year later, few dedicated studies created a game called simply D&D. And this was the first game that actually tried to implement the rule set. It was an official product, and it took over a decade before the proper licensed game was released. The game was called Pool of Radiance and was based on a Dungeons & Dragons system, was developed and released by Strategic Simulation ENC. The company that became quite famous for adapting Dungeons & Dragons rules in their games. They had a game engine that became hallmark for all the RPGs that were developed at this period. The games were text-based with few graphics elements here and there, with turn-based combat, but very tactical. So the games at that time was very much alike pen and paper games you play on the tabletop. And this is how the things kept going for a few years. But technology didn't stay in place, and games were changing. Not only in area of graphic design, but also in gameplay design. Unfortunately, RPGs kind of stayed like one step behind with every iteration. There were some titles that tried to change this approach, and one of them was Eye of the Beholder, released in 1990. This game was one of the first games that adapted D&D rules that used 3D view and semi-action oriented combat. But these games were few and far between. And when pen and paper games started to decline in the 90s, so did the games based on these systems. Now, few companies tried to do something different, including Strategic Simulation in ENC. They were trying to introduce more action-oriented combat, view from the first person, sometimes 3D elements, but it didn't help that much. And the major problem the game had was that they were quite too complicated for other gamers that RPG fans. They usually required knowledge about pen and paper system, knowledge about the setting the game is set upon, for gamers to actually be successful in the computer game itself. So it started to limit actually the market for these games. And so the audience was very specialized, and well, this kind of meant that this game didn't develop and didn't become more popular. But all that changed in 1998, when Baldur's Gate was released.
But it was not the only one. Those are the games that changed the way of adapting pen and paper RPG systems to computer games. All of those titles that you see here have one thing in common. The concept of strictly turn-based combat was abandoned and replaced with more action-oriented combat, more real-time combat. And that was one of the key factors that actually made those games more accessible for wider audience, and of course much more popular. Okay, so in my opinion, the greatest of all, Baldur's Gate Saga. It was developed by BioWare, released between 1998 and 2001. The game is based on advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rule set. This was the game that revitalized CRPG. This was the first CRPG that presented complicated RPG mechanics in very accessible and visually stunning way. It was a game where you could just jump in and play without a prior knowledge about the pen and paper rule set. For many, including me, it was the first RPG game that actually made them interested in pen and paper Dungeons & Dragons. And at the same time, it was a faithful adaptation where D&D rules could serve as a game manual.
Yeah, I played the game this way.
Baldur's Gate set new standards for RPG games for many years to come. Not only those based on pen and paper rules, but all RPGs in general.
And one of the games that raised up to these new standards was Torment. Developed by Lake Isle Studios and released in 1999, the game was based on the same engine that was used for Baldur's Gate Saga and also implemented the second edition of ND&D rules. Now, the difference between those titles were quite big, but we just only focused on two of them. The first one was approach to alignment system. Alignment system in Dungeons & Dragons games is a static property that players have to select at the start of the game when they create a character. It determines the character perspective on ethical and moral spectrums, like good with evil or lower scales. Now, in Torment, when you create a character, you do not have these requirements. Your character is true neutral, so it's not very clearly defined. Now, as you progress through the game and make choices, interact with people, your character changes to reflect your gameplay style. So you can become evil or good, and it doesn't depend on checkbox you select at the start of the game. It depends on how you play the game. So in effect, it also game reacts to your actions. So it's kind of like a spiral. When you do something, game reacts to you, and then you have to react back, which created new experience never seen before in games. Another approach, and this is only specific for advanced Dungeons & Dragons, was the approach to how character developments look like. In Dungeons & Dragons rules, when you create a character, your statistics like strength, or intelligence are determined at the start. They rarely change, and they can be modified by things like magical items, spells, or maybe gifts from the gods. But players have very little impact on those statistics by themselves. In Torment, the developers gave this power to the people, so to speak. At every level you got time, you could change statistics slightly. So not only you could define your vision perspective on the world moral system, but also change your characters to become much more powerful in areas you wanted to. And this was the two key elements that made this game stand out from the crowd.
The other great title that was based on pen and paper system was Neverwinter Nights. It was developed by BioWare and released in 2002. This game is based on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition rule set. This game presented quite innovative approach. The creators resigned from a concept of building the team. That was something completely new and non-canonical, as the team concept is characteristic for pen and paper RPG games, especially for D&D. The other thing is that this is a first computer RPG game based on pen and paper system that was made in full 3D. That gave the players completely new visual and gameplay experience. The last but not least thing is a toolset. Neverwinter Nights ships with the Aurora toolset, which allows players to create custom modules for the game. These modules may take form of online multiplayer roles, single-player adventures, character trainers, or technology demos. Additionally, several third-party utilities have further expanded the community ability to create custom content for the game. And despite the game age, Neverwinter Nights custom content community remains active even today.
So the next thing we'd like to talk about is Star Wars Knights of the Baltic Saga. The saga is composed of two titles. The first one was developed by BioWare and released in 2003. The second was developed by Obsidian Entertainment and was released in 2005. The game, unlike other titles we mentioned so far, was set in futuristic setting, exactly in Star Wars universe, and was using modified rules for the 3rd edition of the Dungeons & Dragons called simply the D20. It was developed by Wizards of the Coast and quite popular at the time. Now, this game had lots of new things added, but what made it stand out was approach to companions. Now, as you may know, all the companions up to this point were just like your pawns. You kind of could only increase their statistics. Maybe there were a few quests, that you can affect, I don't know, their past or something, but you could never really change them that much on storyline level. Here, developers gave the player the possibility to actually change the moral view of the character, your companions. You could corrupt noble Jedi to become a Sith, something that never happened before in any game. Also, you could change the profession of your companions. So instead of having one set of companions, you could, in the middle of the game, just flip things upside down. So it adds another layer for the players to think of, not only how to increase statistics of my companions, but also, do I want to affect them to such a way that I change the character? Do I want to change the profession and change my team completely? So this was very interesting. Now, next thing that was used in that game that appeared in other titles, but it was the first time in adaptation of pen and paper system, was how skills of the player character affected dialogue trees. And I'm not talking here about skills like persuasion, intimidation, or diplomacy. I'm talking about skills like repair. That skills usually considered to be gameplay elements that you cannot, I know you can repair something. Now, if you develop your character, you start to unlock new options in dialogues that you couldn't have if your skill weren't high enough. So it starts to and more resemble the pen and paper game. When you develop your character, you feel all these little skills that may not matter as a gameplay-wise, but they create your character feel. They create like this feel button of character, and here you can do this in a computer game. And the last thing was introduction of minigames. So the first game based on pen and paper system that introduced something that is not related to the system. The minigames like Swoop Racing, Space Combat, or card game Azak existed in Star Wars universe, but was not governed by D&D rules. And yet, it was introduced into the game. It was adaptation of pen and paper rules. This shows us that you don't have to strictly adhere to rules, but you can introduce something extra and make the game even more interesting, and yet it is still considered to be adaptation of the pen and paper rule set.
The last great RPG game that was based on existing RPG system is Neverwritten Nights 2. It was developed by Obsidian, released in 2006. The game is based on Dungeons & Dragons 2.5 edition rule set. The creators learned from previous titles and introduced all the great features that we mentioned before. Most of them that Marcin said during talking about the previous game. So, but there is one more that is really worth mentioning: the toolset, because the toolset in this game was way better than this one from the Neverwritten Nights 1. It was more powerful and flexible in creating adventures, and thanks to that, the game is alive even today. And once again, that proves how important it is for the developers to share their tools with the community. It makes the game living for many, many years, and it gains interest in whole RPG industry.
And the last, but not least, is Dungeons & Dragons Online, the first and, to our knowledge, the only one massive multiplayer online game that uses pen and paper system as a baseline. It was developed by Turbine ENC and released in 2006, and it's using Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 edition rule set. Although it's based on pen and paper RPG system, it's quite unique in the sense that Turbine introduced quite lots of new mechanics. I will only mention two of them. The first one is character development system that is still D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, but again adds much more depth. In normal Dungeons & Dragons system, you only actually get at the moment the possibility to influence your character development every time you level up. So it can take quite a while. While in Dungeons & Dragons Online, they introduced something you could call mini levels, that during this one level you have a chance to acquire different traits, perks, quips that define your character even more and give you the feeling that you progress all the time. You don't have to wait like 10 hours before you get the level. You just you play a few moments and you get this one moment where you can increase, okay, I got add +1 to here, +1 to there. Another thing that is very important was introduction completely action-based combat. Now, as we talked already, games were moving away from strict tactical and turn-based combat. Yet, when playing Baldur's Gate or Neverwinter Nights 2 even, you could still pause the game and issue orders. In that game, you don't have this opportunity. You have to do all on the fly. And yet, it's Dungeons & Dragons game, and it's still adaptation. So, action and RPG game, classic RPG game in one, well, never happened before.
It might seem that nothing is more simple than to create a game based on existing RPG system. Well, we have all the mechanics prepared and ready to use in our game. Unfortunately, it's not that simple as it appears at the beginning. Each video game has a specific set of gameplay mechanisms. To create this set, first of all, we need to carefully analyze pen and paper RPG elements, such as player attributes, skills, interactions with NPCs, and other objects, etc. Each of those elements can potentially become an individual mechanism in our game. Unfortunately, we can't transfer all of them.
Yeah, but why? Why can't you use all elements? After all, we paid so much money to acquire this license. We really spent lots of time actually convincing these guys up there to give us this license so we can make great games. So why now decide to throw away all these goodies they have?
But consider the fact that game production has its own rules and limitations. Implemented mechanisms should be playable and attractive for the player. Production is limited in time and financially. Each new mechanism increases the cost of production and increases the time. Therefore, at this stage, we reject elements that are clearly does not fit into our vision of the game, or are simply not suitable to use in a computer game.
Yeah, but are they? Do we know that already? How we can judge something is not suitable here? Maybe we just don't look from the proper perspective. Maybe we should look differently. After all, when we decide to adapt the game, we accept the challenge. So, should we just give up on the start? Maybe we should look around, maybe change things a bit, and just try it.
Well, true. A good example to discuss this is the method of calculating damage inflicted in combat. This aspect is strongly influenced by the type of view used in game. Isometric view allows faithful adaptation. On the other hand, first-person view is not so forgiving. Transferring the method directly leads to an absurd situation. Sleeping enemy shot directly in the head stands up and fights whenever your dice roll is too weak to kill him instantly. That's unbelievable. I'm sure that a good game master could find an explanation for that, but we don't have one in our game. Game mechanics should be self-explanatory.
Yes, and I agree with that. Although, we have to remember that every change we make, every feature we decide not to include or reveal, means that we're moving away from the system we have. So, we lose connection to what we actually try to build on. And not only we just can lose money because, yeah, well, we invested and now we're changing stuff, but also we can probably anger the fans that are waiting for the most playful adaptation of the beloved system, and we all know that there's nothing worse than angry fan.
Oh yeah, couldn't disagree with you. And because of that, we need to test as many mechanisms as we can. And that leads us to another step in our production workflow, which is prototyping. At this stage, we are prototyping all the mechanisms that were chosen during the preliminary analysis of the pen and paper rule set. The main goal here is to check the attractiveness and functionality of previously chosen mechanism. A mechanic that looks good on paper may be boring or even unplayable in a computer game. Moreover, some solutions might be too complicated for a computer game requirements. There is no game master who would explain the mechanics at every step that permeates in a game. Gameplay solutions should be clear and intuitive for the player. They should also be able to defend themselves without the need of extensive explanation.
Yeah, but what about tutorials? The players and today I should be quite, well, I wait for that every game will have tutorial built into that. If this doesn't have, well, who knows what happens. Yeah, so what about that? Then if we decide to remove complicated mechanics simply because it's too complicated, even without trying it out, should we do it? Well, I would say we should try to explain it maybe by using tutorials, and removing complicated mechanisms means that we try to simplify the gameplay without really much reasons, really. So do we go with the simple game that is kind of boring, or do we try something different?
Okay, true. I agree that the tutorials are very useful and helpful, and then they can change a lot. But still, I strongly believe that it's way better that mechanic is explained on the way, so the player is not forced to play the tutorial just to learn how to play the game. Okay, but let's take a look on that from the opposite side. Some solutions presented in the pen and paper rule set might be too simple and will not be a challenge for the player. In this case, we can just abandon the mechanism or modify it in the way that it preserves the spirit of the original solution, but at the same time was a challenge and gave satisfaction from the game.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's better to change something and adjust it to make game interesting and keep the connection to the original franchise instead of just dropping them away.
True. But okay, let's talk about another aspect, another issue that we can encounter when adapting an pen and paper RPG system. Very often, the elements which are functioning in pen and paper system separately, but their gameplay impact is very similar, are combined into one element in a computer game. It makes the game mechanics clearer and more intuitive. For example, in pen and paper D&D rules, we have two separate skills connected with sneaking: move silently and hide. In case of a computer game, that would cause confusion. Whenever trying to develop his sneaking abilities, player will be forced to invest his experience points into two different skills. Good idea here is to combine move silently and hide into one skill responsible for sneaking.
But should we really do this? Now, if the developers for original system introduce this skill and they have a reason. Now, more skills mean more customization for my character. I can create unique personalities like Knight that loves to create ambushes, and this is why it has high skill. Okay, I don't be silent because I always run around with playtime, so sneak skill is useless to me. But using hide skill, I can create unique character. Now, fusing these abilities into one skill means that I have less tools to create my own unique person. And so we take away, we have less skills to play around, we have less customization, and then all characters almost all the same.
Yes, there is a danger in that you can lose something. That's why very important is to prototype as many things as we can and check it on gameplay. That's why at the stage of prototype, we are verifying set of mechanisms chosen during the preliminary analysis. Some of them, of course, will be rejected. Some will stay unchanged, and some will be rebuilt. As a result, it allows to create a complete and verified list of mechanisms that we use in the game.
Can I answer the question?
No. Okay. Maybe after. Okay. Okay. The other very important thing when adapting RPG setting, when adapting existing RPG setting to a computer game, is the setting itself. It's usually huge. It's so big that it's almost impossible to take all the elements and put them in the game. So the question is, how much the video game world should reflect pen and paper RPG setting? That's a very difficult question, but let's talk about it a bit. Video game world can be connected with the setting by characters, events, places, and items. The closer the connection is, the more limiting it is for the game designer. He must stiffly stick to the framework set by the setting, which significantly reduces his creativity.
Well, I can't agree with that. Not completely. Well, when you look at these settings you take, and you mentioned they are quite big and complicated. And yes, and these settings will develop over years by lots of other people, so it's like treasure chest, we can take whatever we like. Now, it almost feels like using the setting as it is means that we have to spend less resources. And as you mentioned at the start of the discussion about this, you mentioned that the production and cost are quite important thing to take into consideration when introducing new features from the pen and paper game. If you take the already built system, you don't have to spend resources of inventing new worlds, on creating new characters, because they are already there. All you have to focus on is on creating new elements that can be added to the game world by making it just richer. And yeah, it costs you less money, and the characters are more interesting. At the same time, using strong connections to the world means that fans will be very happy because they see elements that encounter during the normal pen and paper games in their favorite computer game.
Yeah, that can be true. But consider that the closer the connection with the setting is, the more work for the developer to reliably introduce elements that are known only to fans of the setting. These elements must be introduced in a way to be understood not only for the fans. It must be, for example, if you introduce a character or a place, it must be firmly set in a game world, so that the player can understand its importance and relationship with the game world without the need to checking the handbook or the rulebook. So it's like you said on the beginning of the presentation. The main problem that the games from the 80s and early 90s had was that they required pro knowledge about the pen and paper rule set in order to understand the world and the mechanics. We don't want that. We want the players to be able to play freely without having to look to a handbook. Of course, this does not exclude placing of fine nuances which might be understood only by hardcore fans. Their presence is even desirable, but it cannot be decisive for understanding the game. The best solution here, I guess, is to give the designers as much freedom as possible, but at the same time, not forget about putting visible amount of elements directly connected to the pen and paper setting.
Now, we can talk a bit about Cyberpunk. Unfortunately, we can't tell you a lot, but yes, we are working on a Cyberpunk game based on Cyberpunk role-playing game developed by Mike Ponsley and his team. Now, as RPG company, we're creating RPG game. So we take the rules and we use what we call classic and canonical approach solution, which means that we take the rules from the book, well, actually we trade the manual almost like a Bible, and look at the rule set there from every angle possible, and we think how we can introduce them to the game in the most faithful way we can. It takes us quite a bit of discussion, and sometimes we have very different opinions on how to do it. And well, but as we discussed already, it's not always possible to do it one-to-one. So sometimes, and yeah, it sounds like last time to some Cyberpunk fans, we have to change the rules, and this is unfortunate. Also, sometimes we need to drop the rules simply because pen and paper games are designed in different way than computer games are. They usually proceed in different pace than computer games. when you're with your friends and play a role-playing game, you can usually spend hours, and the game may progress in a game mode from 1 hour to 5 years. So the span of timeline is completely different. In computer games, the things happen almost simultaneously, one event after another. So if there are things that work in time, you need to approach them in different ways. So they can be used in 1 hour of your gameplay instead you have to wait in front of the computer for 5 days before things happen. So this means that we need to change stuff, and sometimes we need to drop things. But we go through all the steps we're describing. First we think, then we prototype, and when something at the prototype level doesn't feel right, we try to change it. So we keep the feel of the cyberpunk, and if there is absolutely no way to do it, well, we have to remove it from the game. But still, this is RPG game we are making. So how to develop your character is important. If you're going to invest in social skills, so you become social animal, you can deal with NPCs much easier than other or your friends that didn't invest in these skills. But at the same time, if you invest more in combat skills, your character becomes more powerful in combat, which leads to
yeah, but because actually what we create is also an action game in which the player skill has a decisive influence on the course of the game. For example, the combat system is based on the Cyberpunk 2020 rule set, which is turn-based and strongly relies on the player character skills and attributes. Manual skill on the player, however, in many cases tip the balance and bridging gaps in player character skills and attributes. So player character skills and attributes will make the game easier, but they are not more important than the player manual skills. So from our experience, I have to say that adapting existing RPG system to a computer game is definitely a challenge. It requires thorough analysis of pen and paper system in order to fully understand it. Only at that point, we are able to start building the game mechanism based on pen and paper rule set. And this is actually a pure fun for us.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, we'll gladly answer them.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Victor Mitchell. I'm very interested in the planning process that you said that you're making when you're trying to build your mechanics. Could you give us some more information about how it looks like? I mean, what do? Do you sit down on a table and discuss it, or do you actually build a prototype or something?
Actually, it looks like we do both. First of all, we are discussing a lot about the rulebook itself. We are discussing every possible element that is there. And then, after lots of discussions, it's not like, for example, I myself, I'm reading the book, I'm taking an element and making prototype. No, it's like we all, as a team, are trying to find the elements that we need, and then we all, as a team, we are deciding what kind of stuff should be prototyped. Because the prototyping is not an easy thing, and it's not very fast. It needs to work on gameplay. It needs to show the vision that we have. It needs to show the spirit of the mechanisms from the rulebook. That's why we need to carefully choose those mechanisms to prototype. And even if we do, during the prototyping stage, it's very often, sometimes it proves that we were right choosing those, and sometimes it proves that we are wrong. And we need to repeat the process once again.
Yeah, and the very important is that you understand the rules in the book. Because, as mentioned, sometimes the rules are not easily transferable, but important is to keep the spirit of the game. So, as we started doing, you probably have to have few gameplay sessions in the system to actually understand the game mechanics, how all the system, okay, because when you read the book, if you are brilliant, you can understand all the connections, but usually the things came out when you have different roles, different classes in the team you play with your team. So then some things that wasn't appearing at the first glance just start to pop out. So you have to be actually pen and paper gamer in the first place, or became one to actually understand mechanics, and then you can do, as Łuksz said, just go and start implement stuff.
Actually, I could add one more thing, because this is kind of interesting. You had to play the game. It was a task given to all the team to play the pen and paper Cyberpunk. So we are doing it at work as a part of our job.
Yes. That must have been very hard.
Very hard, yeah.
So it was. It was.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question. If I separate pen and paper role-playing game into, say, combat mechanics on one hand and role-playing parts and out-of-combat mechanics on the other, do you find it easier to implement combat mechanics from the pen and paper or the role-playing mechanics, and which is actually harder? Do you find it harder to implement combat mechanics or harder to implement role-playing elements?
Well, actually, none of them is easy. Because, as we said, trying to have action-based approach, which kind of contradicts pen and paper rules when you have strict terms and everything happens. Okay, now I attack, and then it's like half an hour later. Now, in a complicated game, you can't have this. If something happens, it has to be like that. You have to have instant interaction with the game. Now, when it comes to role-playing aspect, now, when you look at titles before, we kind of have to, they raise stakes so high that we can't say, okay, we just throw the skills and it works. No, when you look at Never Winter Nights, Knights of the Republic, the things where your gameplay mechanics affect your gameplay on every way. It's not like I develop repair skills and it doesn't matter. No, it appears almost in every aspect of the game, which makes you feel that, yes, I invest in this character and it matters. So the both are really difficult to master, and I can't say which one is easier.
I see. And just one quick question. You are doing the opposite thing that BioWare did. They used to make D&D-based games and they moved away from the license, and you did the opposite thing by going from self-developed RPG systems into Witcher to trying to adapt a pen and paper RPG. Was it just to have a challenge, or is it something else?
Well, because we love Cyberpunk.
Yeah, I wanted to say that first of all, we love Cyberpunk. The team that we are building, CD Projekt in Warsaw, is all of us are fans of Cyberpunk. The other thing is that we strongly believe that it's not true that the games based on pen and paper RPGs are long gone. That's not true, completely not true. There are hundreds, thousands, more than thousands of players that are waiting for that kind of games. The market is really willing to have titles like that. And because of one company, BioWare, started to do something different, it doesn't mean that we need to follow their steps. We are not going to.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm interested in how you deal with problems arising from the different player mentality in pen and paper games and in computer games. For instance, when you sit in a pen and paper game, you are allowing yourself to sink some hours into fun. You're not really sure what will happen actually. And when you're playing a video game, you want to be in control. You want to take the maximum fun out of the experience. And social systems and things like that usually suffer from players just wanting to skip ahead and progress in the game, which is not so in pen and paper games. How do you deal with it?
Well, first of all, we think about winning the game when you actually play as you like. So if you want to skip content, well, it's your game. You can do this, and we're not going to penalize you for that. You pay for your game, so you can play as much as you like, the way you like. Now, if you want to explore the game fully, then you probably talk to almost every NPC you see, you do almost every quest you can find, and participate in combat as much as you like. So it's not really about us, how we deal with that, it's about you. How do you want to consume what we give you?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so hi. Let's start with that. So You have in the pen and paper, you have the mechanics, all mechanics like combat and role-playing, all are obeying the dice, let's say. But in the role-playing, you can play your character and you can invert, you can converse with the DM. So it is more your skills affecting the role-playing game, and the dice affecting your combat. In the computer game, it's the opposite. Your skills affect the combat and your statistics affect the role-play. Are there any, can you give us some ideas how you can make more skills or the way you play the game, not just your statistics to affect the role-playing game of the role-playing aspect of the computer game?
Well, I'm afraid we can't talk much about details, how we're going to approach the problem. But, well, you can take a look at Dungeons & Dragons Online, for example. They approached the problem with that you have something like armor value for your characters. And if you stand there doing nothing, then this base value matters. Now, if you start moving, then it means that if I get hit...
No, I don't mean combat. I'm interested in how you make the roleplay aspect of the computer game, how you can interact with it, so you can approach an NPC in a different way, so it interacts in different ways or something like that. How you can make the interaction more lifelike, more like the pen and paper RPGs, more interesting.
Well, if you ask about Cyberpunk and our approach, unfortunately I can't give you much more details because, okay, honestly we have a very interesting idea about that and actually have few prototypes and it's really cool, but I can't give you any details. So even if I start to talk about some, let's say, other game, it would be too much, so I'm sorry, but...
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mr. from Chemicon Games. So far your presentation was mainly about the great tabletop RPG systems and the advancing technology of video games and how the two interact. I believe in the last, let's say, I don't know, periods, years, whatever, we also see the development of a new mentality in the players themselves. Do you address that by any means? I think like more simple question would be, do you do something for the hardcore but a little bit older, like all of us here probably, tabletop RPG?
Here as well.
And on the other side, the people who had less exposure to tabletop RPG and they want some fast-paced, action-driven experience. How do you make them play your games?
Well, we are trying to actually create our game to match both expectations. I know that it's not easy. We are really working hard on that. We are creating the concept of both action-oriented and at the same time classical canonical RPG. And again, I can't give you much details about that because those stuff are quite unique and we are not yet ready to release the information about that.
Okay, then I'll ask you the same question on The Witcher 2.
Okay.
You have this player who just want to play the combat and then skip all the dialogues and say, come on, they're talking again. You just press X, 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 and then what happens? Do you do any consistent effort to maximize his gaming experience?
Yes, we are thinking about that, and as I said, there are a few ideas. But again, I'm sorry, I can't give you any details.
Thanks.
Hi.
As I got it, one of the most important things is prototyping, and I want to ask to what level do you make your prototypes alive then?
Okay, that's a good question actually, and I can answer it. It's like the main goal is to create a prototype that, for example, some other person that didn't create it would understand the spirits of the mechanism. So, okay, let's say I've created some prototype, and I know what I wanted to show, and then, for example, I take some other people. Okay, guys, can you play it and tell me what you think? And that's why the prototype must have both gameplay mechanics and visuals to show what was I thinking about. It can be too rapid, it can be too simple, it can be too simple. So they are kind of complex.
Developer harassment. They also have to prove if our assumptions about game mechanics on the paper are right. Because usually what you write design for a gameplay element, it may sound fine on paper, but when you start to implement it, it may not be so great as you originally thought. So having prototypes allows us to validate our own designs.
На микрофона, понеже преводачите горе не чуват. Sorry.
How much stuff do you actually prototype? Do you prototype every viable idea, or do you spend considerable effort on thinking this might work, this might not work, and prototype only the stuff that seems more promising?
Okay, because the prototypes are quite complex, we can't just prototype everything all the time. We need to carefully choose what we are going to prototype, and we are doing this in that way. So let's say at this stage of project we are going to prototype, for example, 10 elements, and we need to choose them, because it would be impossible to prototype everything. We are trying to prototype as many things as we can, but still, as we can understand the mechanics, okay, we all are experienced developers, so we can understand the mechanics quite well. So we are able to choose the ones that are really promising, or the ones that are difficult to understand without prototyping. So that's the way we are doing it.
All the games that you mentioned so far have been including your new project. They're using tabletop systems that are actually quite old. Is there any specific reasons for that? And are there any particular pitfalls with more recent tabletop games that have somewhat different design paradigms?
Well, I suppose using the old system may come a bit from nostalgia. We love Cyberpunk, and the new systems, well, we kind of didn't get a chance to get them emotionally attached to them, so to speak. And again, our examples are simply because when you think about the history of RPG games, there is not that many adaptations, and actually the only system that was consistently adapted was Dungeons and Dragons. I would love to see more games adapting other systems, RPG systems, because there's plenty of them. But unfortunately, these titles didn't appear on the market. And maybe now, in the era of Kickstarter and indie games, we can see more titles appearing and adapting different other RPG systems. But unfortunately, looking back in the past and what we can learn from, there is not that many.
The standard tabletop games and card games aim mostly for two types of social experience. One is building virtual realities or imaginative worlds where players can interact with each other and experience something new. And the other is the social experience, meeting other people with your same interest. Provided you are making a single-player RPG or a limited multiplayer RPG, how do you address the lack of the social experience in the computer game?
Well, when it comes to social elements of the gaming, and if we're going to approach them, well, we can't comment on that yet.
Hey guys, hey. I played Witcher 1 and 2, and the thing that really impressed me was the way that you didn't directly show the consequences of the action of the player. Because, you know, for example, you think that you're doing the right thing, and 4 hours later, one of the coolest NPCs get killed because of your actions when it's too late. And you show this short movie. You watch all the stuff that you didn't directly do but led to these consequences, and you're like, oh right.
It's too late to do something.
Yeah, so my question is, how did you come up with this idea? Because it's really cool, really fresh and realistic.
Well, actually, this idea is very old. It was invented when we were working at The Witcher 1, and it's not like it was like, I don't know, some kind of a sudden or unexpected solution. It was hard work, and actually this idea is a result of many discussions and how to approach this problem. We always wanted to create long-term consequences of your choices, because only long-term consequences can show that your choices really matter. Because if you have consequence right away after you did something, it's you can load games and you can change it. That's nothing. But if the consequence is long-term, then you see it's like, oh my God! At the first act of the game, I didn't help this guy, and then after 20 hours of playing the game, a village is burned to the ground because of that. Because this guy was only one person who saved all the villagers. I'm just creating some, it's not the part of any game. But that's the thing we are always going to add to our games. You will never know what will happen if you choose something. And that's why we don't have this whole karma system, good and evil. It's always on you. You choose something, and you'll never know if it's good or evil. That's the way it happens in life as well, so that's the reason.
One more, just in relation to what you just said. In the beginning of Witcher 2, when Geralt tries to escape the dungeon, there is actually a choice, an unknown choice, whether the player turns left or right.
Yeah.
And me and my colleagues argued a lot. Because one way to see this, and yeah, just as a reminder, whether you turn left, you experience one story, whether you turn right, you experience okay, that time. You experience another story, and we argued a lot. And one of the positions was, this is very good because it actually reflects real life. You know, you try to cross the street and a car hits you over.
Exactly.
And the other point was, this is very lame because you're not actually making a choice. Yes, you have two split contents, but this is not a knowing choice. Did you argue over the same debate, and what were the arguments that led to the solution that we implemented?
Okay, it was like we always wanted to introduce that not only dialogue choices matter, but also the gameplay choices. Like you said, in real life, it's not only like I speak with someone, I say I won't help you. Okay, this matters, but also the way if I turn left or right. Sometimes it can change your life completely. Because, for example, by turning left, you'll be hit by a car, or maybe you'll meet your future wife, for example, if you turn other direction. That's why I wanted to show that when playing the game, the things you do on the gameplay, like, for example, combat or even simple walking or exploration, matter.
Well, thank you very much for answering this one.
Hi. I'd like to ask about character customization in your game. Like, for example, in Witcher, for obvious reasons, we cannot much change the hero because he is predefined. But when we speak about your next game, for example, Cyberpunk, how customizable your character will be in a game? Like appearance, character traits, like, for example, wisdom or charisma or some stuff like this.
The character will be fully customizable. As you mentioned, we're going to implement roles from the Cyberpunk. So at the start of the game, you will have to select not only how your hero will look like, but also what role it will have in the game, which is similar to classes in other RPGs. Plus, one of the key elements of Cyberpunk is style over substance, which means that how you look like does matter. And this is something we going to do. And
but we can talk
exactly too much about that.
Okay, then, from female gamer perspective, can you play as a female then?
Can you answer this?
Will there?
question about the pen and paper cyberpunk. What roles do you personally love to play in the pen and paper when you play cyberpunk?
Well, originally for me it was solo, but recently I switched to the fixer.
And I'm always playing as a nomad. I like the big barbarians with big guns and motorbikes.
Yeah, I like to talk, so fixer is perfect for me.
One quick question, because most of the games that you cited as influences in pen and paper adaptation to computer games tend to surface a lot of roles, just dice rolls. I mean, on the other hand, Witcher doesn't surface, just interface-wise, doesn't surface your roles of success. Do you think you will switch to more transparent dice rolling mechanics in your next game, or you would prefer to keep it behind the curtain, so to speak?
Well, this is yet to be decided.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
We can have one more or two questions. Run for it.
I wanted to ask, when you write a story with far-reaching consequences and different branches, in case you have to rewrite a portion of it, change something, how do you handle this? How do you handle all the paths, all the consequences? Because this kind of complicates the process of writing the story, when you have to do some reiteration or something.
Okay, first of all, it's always it's like we always prepare a detailed schematics for all the plot. So it always knows what are the consequences and where the branching starts, and we know why, what happens, and what's happened next. So because of that, after creating a very detailed scenario with schematics, we don't have a big problems in understanding where are the problems, because this schematic actually shows us where are some inconsequences in our ideas. But it's never, the more complicated the plot is, the more difficult it is, because I can assure you that working on the Witcher 1 and the Witcher 2, when talking about the scenario, it was really, really hard. Just to be sure that those long-term consequences will not destroy something. Or that, for example, player will do on the way something unexpected, and all of those will not make any sense. And that takes lots of time and requires graphic representation of whole plot structure of the game. And it changes all the time when you find some inconsequences.
Did you have to do a lot of changes, a lot of switching around?
Not a lot, because it's like before we start to work on the game, we need to be sure that we know what we are doing. We can't just make a game and then suddenly say, oh my god, we really messed it up, we need to rebuild the whole game. No, it's not going to, it's never happened. We know what we're doing. Of course, some minor fixes, some minor changes in branching might happen, of course, but only minor ones.
Thanks.
Well, we have time for only one question, so...
Okay, my question was very related to this one actually. It was more on the production side of things. How do you decide how big of a game you can make? How many choices that are vastly different from each other? And how much time it's going to take for you and to be able to realize it?
That's actually, it's not a difficult question, because we know how much money we have and we know how much time we have. So it's really to count. We know how good are our people, we know how fast they can create the content, and by knowing that we can calculate how long we will the game. Of course, we have some ideas about that, and we can somehow try to push the things farther to make the game longer, but still it's always based on the strong calculations, through mathematics.
My question was more like, how do you decide to add some more unpopular choices? Because I guess most players want to play as the good guys, and you obviously have to have the option to play as the evil guy. And how do you decide how much of those to include and what distribution they should take?
It's too early to say, actually.
It's more in general.
But in general, actually, from my opinion, actually, our ideology of doing stuff is like when we are not having the predefined character, we cannot reward player for being good or evil, for example. It's your choice of playing. All those paths must give you same amount of gameplay experience. Different kind, but same amount.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you for your attention.